Kindergarten Daf Mesech Kesuvos Daf. We begin 8 lines down at the top of the Yomim. In the middle of a discussion with the previous Daf regarding this halacha of when we have witnesses that are signed on the document and we need verification of what happens if there's a contradiction between these witnesses. The witnesses that are signed, there's no sign of that there's any problem with their signatures. And then those who are verifying or coming to invalidate, that's like Gemara's middle discussing that halacha of what we ended off with Ukum Moinim Cheskes Marei, that you're going to say that it's going to be, you're going to remain in the status quo because of the contradiction of the two different pairs of witnesses. Some of the discussed in today's daf are kiyum shtaros, like we said, regarding authenticating documents. If you have Eidim Sha'amru Ksav Yodim Huzeh, if witnesses that says that this is their signature, but that's contrast to a case of Ksav Yodim Yitzim Mokam Acher, because if it's the Eidim who themselves are saying that's the handwriting, so then they could be believed to say that there was Anusim Hayu or Psum Hayu, but if it was Yitzim Mokam Acher, then they have no right to invalidate necessarily a document that relates to the discussion of Trey or Trey. If you have an Eidim that are being Mekayim versus the Eidim HaChasumim, the witnesses who are signed, since they're being verified from elsewhere, that we say that what they're saying is true. But then you have the other people that are saying that it was signed falsely because of the psul. So then we're going to say Ukum Moinim Cheskes Marei. That was the last thing we mentioned in the previous stop, that we remain with the chazaka of the prior status where we can't necessarily collect with it, but we're not going to rip it up either. The halacha of Kesuvos Medusa al Ashtar Meirla Filacha Kamashon. The person could he could write down his testimony that he recalls on a piece of paper, and then therefore even after many years he could come and testify, even though he didn't really remember fully, but he can remind himself from a piece of paper, which that relates to the discussion of Mepiham B'Le Mepik Sabam, which is, we know Al Pi Shnei Eidim Yochim Davar has to be from their mouth, not from their writing, which the Gemara is going to have machlekes regarding how much do they have to remember, and also for how long of a period does a person even recall. They will say that he's really recalling and he's not just seeing what he wrote for himself. So we had mentioned the previous Daf of Brisa. Two people were signed on the document and now they died. Two people came along and they said, okay, we know that this is their handwriting, so they're doing the kiyum, but they were forced. They were minors, they were invalid. So the Brisa said, they believe, and the shtar is going to be invalid. Why? Because this is your classic hapesh also pesheter. The Eidim who authenticated the shtar by stating ksav yodmu, they're the ones who can disqualify the shtar by stating, but yes, they were anusim hayu. The whole validation is dependent on us, and we're saying that they were pas. But then the Brisa continued the second half. But let's say that there are witnesses that it's their handwriting, meaning other witnesses. Or we can verify by comparing to other documents. Because you had a different document that had already been contested once, already established in court. Oh, then we said, then because since these agents are not authenticate the shtar because we're authenticating elsewhere, they cannot disqualify the shtar. Which the Gemara explained what that means to say is lo magvinenbe. They cannot collect the loan with it because we're not going to tear it up, but we can't collect with it. What's the trade? Because you have the Eidim that are signing, and you have the Eidim that are being Mekayim, which really have others that Mekayim, but it's a suffix, because the witnesses who are signed, which are being authenticated from elsewhere, and they're not saying anything about that to apostle, they're saying that this is kasha. Then you have two other witnesses saying, yes, but they were katanim, they were psulim, they're invalid. So these two witnesses are contradicting themselves, which creates a suffix. So we say, okay, wherever the monies are right now, that's why we say we don't tear up the document, because let's say the guy grabs it, we can say, okay, we can't verify what the status is, and let's say it's a lekeach, we're going to say that the meicher has the chazaka, and if it's a loan, we say the borrower has the chazaka. Whoever's holding on to the money right now, we say, okay, that was the halacha we said, because it's a tray, we don't know who to believe more than another, it's a suffix, and we're going to keep it as it is. That's how Gemara continues and compares this is 8 lines down at the top of the Yamid. The Gemara, when it wants to embellish this halacha of Ukum Moinim Cheskes Marei, which we say tray, the Gemara says, the Gemara compares this to interesting case of, there was a person, Bar Shatya, but the word Shatya means a shaita. So this guy had an estate, and the Varshatya Zav Nichse. So he sold from his properties, and also two people came along and said, Kishushay Zavim. This is not a valid sale. He sold it when he was mentally deranged. He's not able to make a kinyan when he's mentally deranged. But also another two people came along and said, no, Kishuchalim Zavim. No, he sold it when he was sane. So Amar Vashi, the same halacha we mentioned in the previous daf from Rav Nachman, meaning from a few lines before. Amar Vashi says, okay, we have two witnesses saying he was sane, two witnesses saying he was insane. Or some of the Girsa Ara, Becheskes Barshatya, that would be more appropriate, but the monetary possessions, we're going to say, is going to remain in the Chazaka of Barshatya. You want to know, could the buyer say that I was mitzi it? I am going to have it from the Meicher. No, the Meicher is the Mecheskes Morikama. He's the Muchzik. And we're going to remain there with the Chazaka because you have it today. You have two people saying this way, two people saying that way. Very similar to the case we had in the previous daf of when you have the two witnesses who are signed and the two witnesses who are saying yes, but they're anusim. They're essentially contradicting each other if there's validity to the document. We said, okay, and here the Chazaka is Barshatya. But the Gemara qualifies this teaching and says, we didn't say that it's going to remain in the Chazaka Barshatya. The Gemara says an interesting point. There has to be an element of Chazaka here. You're only a muhsik if you have a Chazaka, meaning, the Gemara explains, we only said it El de Isle only if Barshatya had in these properties Chazaka de Av Hosei. He had this was already a prior status that he had this from his father, which that's obviously a valid Chazaka because his father was a definite owner. Avalesle Chazaka de Av Hosei, but if let's say this Barshatya did not have in these properties a Chazaka, a presumed status from his father, rather he had his own Chazaka where he bought it himself and he was machzigit, then I mean we say, no, Kishushay Zavin, that he was insane when he bought it, or Kishushay Zavin and he sold it when he was insane. In other words, like Rashi explained, what the Gemara means to say is, we say that his buying is like his selling. You don't have a Chazaka to nullify your mechira to say, wait a second, how do we know that you were sane? Maybe you were insane. Yeah, but maybe you were insane when you bought it too. So only if you had... What?
Nobody contested. Nobody had a problem when he bought it. He could have it for 10 years.
Right. The only thing is
Nobody's challenging it.
Right, right. In the Chanami, right. That's a good point. But that's what Rashi comes to explain. Mitzad the Chazaka Shabai, mitzad the fact that you're saying that I don't know if he was saying when he sold it, I don't know if he was saying either when he bought it. We don't know, meaning Barshatya was sometimes Chalim, sometimes Shaitan. So you want to say that he's the Muksik. But what Chazaka do we have? We don't know if you were saying when you... What's the Chazaka? Chazaka is that was his. How is it his? Because he bought it from someone.
3 years and nobody's challenging it.
Let's say it's not 3 years.
Okay.
And even if it is 3 years, you have to know.
But it goes back, it has to be a Vohoso. That means it's possible that he could have had it for many years.
Hey, you wonder why couldn't we say a case of himself? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe if he becomes a shait in between, you have to know what the case would look like. Al Kapanim, what the Gemara is saying is that just because he bought it and now he's selling it, wouldn't necessarily mean that he'd be a muksik because.
Why does the rule happen after that he was a shait when he bought it and sold it? What if he was cholim when he bought it and sold it? How do we know which way?
No, in the Chanami. If he was cholim, if we know for sure he was cholim.
No, we don't know. So what? So it's 50-50. So why?
No, so then he doesn't have a chazaka. He's not muksik. We're not muksik that this was his. It was the same suffix when he's selling. The same suffix when he bought it. So it doesn't give us any reason to assume that it's his more than the other person, and then we could say that the other person would be equally as a suffix as Barshatya himself. Now, continuing on the theme from the previous daf, if you recall, I mentioned an idea from Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes had said an interesting answer. The Gemara originally assumed from that brisa when we said that if, let's say, there was Eidim, the Ksav Yadim was Yitzim Mokam Achar. So we said that we ain't Elu Naman. Originally the Gemara thought what that meant to say was that they're not believed to say that they're Psulim. And Azoy Vayit, so far that now they could collect with it because you have witnesses on it. We don't believe those who want to say that they're apostles. And so Rav Sheshes wanted to say that obviously a hakasha is tchilas hazama, and just like you cannot do hazama unless the litigant is there, so too, you cannot do hakasha until the witnesses are there too. However, the Gemara continues on that teaching and brings not like that. He says, yes, of course, you cannot do hazam unless if the witnesses are there, because you want to punish them, as Rashi brought from the Gemara Baba Kama, Yavad Bal Hashar, V'Yaman Al Shayre. But this is where he disagrees with Rav Sheshes. That, and we actually contradicted Rav Sheshes also before from Rav Nachman. But you could refute witnesses even though they're not there, and that was definitely the logical svara that should be like that. Now, what he adds on the interesting chiddush is, he says, now if you do hazama when the witnesses are not there, so in the hida hazama lahavi, although it's not going to be hazama to punish them, not for capital punishment, not for monetary punishment, but a chasha miyahavi. But it's almost like the inverse of Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes wanted to say hakasha is tchil hazama, and just like hazama has to be before hakasha also, he's saying the exact opposite in a way. He's like, although hazama doesn't work before them, but in hazama is definitely hakasha. He's definitely refuting him what he's saying about his testimony because you were there with us on that day. How could you have said that? So he says that even though it's not going to be hazama shel b'fanim, but it definitely will include a hakasha in it. Now in the Brisa we said, again going back to the previous stuff, the time of the Brisa said, now if let's say, however, there are witnesses, other witnesses, that this is their handwriting, or if their handwriting was coming out from a different place, mishtar, from a document shekavul of iru, which was already contested on Behuchzi Bevezna, and then the court went and verified it and said this is his signature, it's valid. So he said that the other witnesses not believed to say that they were anusim or ktanim or psul. Now the Gemara makes a diak, makes an inference. Kavul of iru in sounds like that specifically variable number one. The Gemara is going to bring a few different qualifications for this halacha. So it has to be from kavul of iru. If let's say it was contested, well, the kavul of iru, but let's say they have another document in the court, it was never contested. Then that will not be effective to compare the signatures to say that this is valid. Oh, so the Gemara Masayla of Asir, suppose Rav Basi, because Rav Basi says, you cannot validate a document from another document, only from a document that had been contested on that document itself. And then was supported and solidified in the court through its witnesses. Because Rashi explains, if that other document wasn't contested and then verified, so we're concerned that one itself is forged. So what are you proving from that other one? Maybe there was like a bunch of different forged documents and the court got them all. So how are you proving from one counterfeit to another counterfeit? So therefore, that was variable number one. That if you want to have the Ksav Yod Mitzvah Malkum Achar, has to be that document has had ear on it and then it was verified. Additionally, another variable, Amr Nadai, the Nadai said, the Emakayim and the Sashtar, you cannot validate a document from two dowries or mishtei sadis, or from two fields, meaning from the witnesses on those documents. If they're signed on two other documents, which are in the sale of two fields or two ksubas, then you could take this third one and compare it to those two. But it has to be moreover, has to be that the consumer, through these documents, got to eat the produce of these fields for Gimel Shanim, for 3 years. Then you could verify the third document if the signatures are the same, and Ubashayfi, that he ate the produce for 3 years without being contested. Then we see obviously that must be those two documents are good, and then you compare the third document to that one. And one more variable, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, ubiyotze mitachas yad acher, has to be that these documents that you're verifying, the third one from those two, that those other two are documents that were produced by a different person. But from this guy himself who's producing the third document, it's not going to help to go ahead and use those two documents to verify this third document. So the Gemara explains, why are you saying that if he's the one who produced the other two, that he cannot use the third one to compare to that one because maybe he looked at the writing of those documents and he was precise and he copied over the signature of the third one exactly like that one. But says the Gemara, what do you mean? Even if someone else, his friend, his neighbor, has two documents, maybe he also went to look over. He says, "Oh, well, let me see. You look like you're busy doing your business, your taxes." And he goes and he sees his documents and he copies and he forges over. So why is it any different if it's his own or someone else? Says the Gemara, a person would be very difficult. He cannot be so precise to copy over the handwriting exactly because it's not in front of him. So although you could see someone else's signature, very different if it's sitting there right in front of you for a half hour and you're copying over exactly and you're practicing and you're going over and you're seeing how you could copy this person's signature, and therefore that's why there says the Gemara, these are the three variables that we said. Has to be has to be from two Kesuvos or two fields that the owner got to eat with them 3 years and ubeshufi without any contesting. And the third one has to be from someone else, but not from himself. That those two cannot be his own documents that he's using, because maybe he would be Messiah. Now, Tarmalena Brisa, continuing with regarding the documentation of a person's testimony. So, a person, if he became a witness for something and he's afraid that he's going to forget it, he could write down his testimony al hashtar on a piece of paper, on a piece of parchment, and he could put away that document, and he could testify based on that writing, even after many years, because he has it, he'll remember by writing down his notes, and he'll be able to see that many years later. But we have a machlokes. Amar Rav Huna, he says, this is only if he's going to remember on his own without even seeing the document. Meaning, why is he writing it down then? So Rashi says, no, he'll remember a little bit from the testimony on his own. He just won't remember every detail, what exactly was and what the mergers and whatever. And so, he remembers the main idea. He says, no, he says, even if the guy is not going to recall on his own, only after he sees the document will he pay attention, he'll remember, so that it's not totally forgotten. Meaning, when he's reminded, he'll remember. Because if a person would not remember at all, say, wow, I totally have no recollection. I must have been this happened, I can't remember, this is my handwriting, wow. That would be invalid according to everyone. Because the Torah tells you, mipihem. Mipi shnei edim has to be from their mouth, v'lo mipi ksavim, it can't be from their writing. So if the person doesn't recall it at all, that's definitely going to be invalid according to all. The question is, does a person have to recall on his own without even looking at the document? He just wants to remember some of the details? Or could be he doesn't remember at all, but when he sees it, he'll remember. That's a machlokes between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan. How far can this document allow him to recall where he doesn't remember on his own? Now, Amar Rabbi says, Shemaman of Rabbi Yochanan, from this last opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, that says even though you don't remember on your own, but when you see it, you'll remember it, that's going to be effective. So that regarding these two people, that they know testimony, but a minshich had been out, one of them forgot. The other guy could and said, "What are you talking about, uncle? Don't you remember we were there? It was going to and that person, and they were doing this and that, and then he went and borrowed from him."
Exactly, there's witnesses. The witnesses saw his writing on them. We signed.
Right. So we're saying with two witnesses, if one guy forgot, the other guy could tell the other witness, he says, don't you remember this and that? And he could remind him, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that even though he doesn't remember on his own, but when he's reminded, he will remember. That is based on Rabbi Yochanan's teaching that's going to be effective. Now, but Iboila, the following question. Atzmai, if the litigant himself will remind the Eidim until they remember what's the halacha over there? Meaning, the guy himself, the lender, says, what are you guys talking about? I asked the two of you to come. Remember? It was a hot day. We were in the Catskills. I said, come over because I need you guys right now. I'm lending someone a few $1 million. You guys were there. You don't remember? And they're like, no. But he reminds them until they, taka. What Allah, would that also be effective? So that's a machlokes. Chaviva Amay says, Afila Atzmai, says even the guy himself is effective to remind the witnesses, and then they'll remember. And Rav Shloimy says, no, Atmiloi. Says, no, the guy himself is not able to go ahead and remind the witnesses until they remember. That wouldn't be valid. And the halacha is, Atmiloi, that's true. The guy himself cannot be utilized in reminding the witnesses, but as you can tell with Beis, but if the witness himself is a Talmudic scholar, then even if the litigant himself reminds him. Now, why would that be? What's the pshat? Why would we say why can't the litigant himself remind the witnesses? So Rashi explains because a Talmud Chacham, if it wouldn't be that he remembers to definitively, he wouldn't rely on the suffix to go ahead and to get up and say testimony. Meaning another regular person, you can't use the litigant because people have manipulation techniques and they you remember, right? Some gaslighting or whatever it is that You remember, right? Yeah. We were there. You remember you went and you said and you saw a Talmid Chacham, a Tzom Rabbanan won't be intimidated to if he's not sure, he's not going to say testimony. So a Talmid Chacham, the guy himself could quote unquote remind him. As the Gemara illustrates with a story, Kihod Rav Ashi, Rav Kahana, that Rav Ashi had a certain testimony that he knew as a witness for Rav Kahana. Now, Amalei, so Rav Kahana said to Rav Ashi, Vidochemar Hai Sadusa, does the master not recall this testimony? Meaning Rav Ashi was the guy who witnessed this, and he says, "You remember?" So Amalei Lo, he says, "No, I don't recall." So Rav Kahana said to him, he says, don't you were there by the accident. Didn't you see that it was in such and such that he banged into me first? Amalei says, "Well, he done that." I said, I don't know. I don't recall. L'soif idkar Rav Ashi, the end of Ashi recalls. And then Aslei, so he testified for him. So Chazar of Kahana, the so he saw that Rav Kahana was uncomfortable. He was wondering why Rav Ashi testified, and because he didn't remember, and he the litigant, was reminding him. So Amalei said to me, Sabar Alachka Samichna, he says, "Do you think I'm relying on you, that you told me that this would happen and I don't remember?" I know that he says, "Don't worry, I reminded myself and I recalled that that's what happened." And again, therefore we see that a Talmid Chacham could be reminded by Atzmai, by the Baal Din himself, and we're not concerned that he's going to come and testify even though he's not sure. Now, it's not Hasid. The Gemara is going to quote a Mishnah at the end of this Amid will relate back to this halacha that we're discussing. We're trying to figure out the length of time that a person can recall testimony, because that's what we're saying about writing down their testimonies, so that they remember. How long does it take for a person to forget that we don't believe that he remembers anymore? So this relates to the following very unrelated sugya, but it relates to this idea. A Mishnah in Masechet Zalos, Hatluliyas, which are these different mounds on the ground, which people bury oftentimes in mounds. Why? Why would a person bury over there in a mound? Because people generally don't tilt off from the road to go onto a mound. So, regarding these mounds, hakreives that are close, bein la'ir or bein la'derech, whether they're close to the city or to a road, which more later on is going to explain what does that mean, a city or a road. Any city or road that has a mound, we're going to have this? Not necessarily. But echet chadashes, whether they're new. What does it mean the mound is new? That it's not so long ago that there wasn't any mounds over here. Where you could say, since it's a new mound, it's a new hill, that if someone had buried someone over there, so we would have remembered that someone died in town. So whether it's new, those mounds, is whether they're old, to me is, out of doubt, we're going to say that hill is tummy. Why? Because since it's close to the city, you could say an independent woman went on her own, and she had a miscarriage. Yeah, right. No one knew about it. The woman miscarried. She's not publicizing it, and she went. It's very close to town. So whether it's new or old doesn't make a difference. We're going to suspect that mound is tummy. Now, the ones that are very far away, where an individual woman wouldn't go so far on her own. So then chadasha is tahiris. If they're new, we're going to assume that it's tar, because had it been that someone was buried over there, we would have known. Because no woman on her own is burying her miscarriage over there, and again, therefore that's tar. But yeshan is tameis. If they're old, then even though they're far, they're going to be tamei, because who knows? Maybe at one point it was known, but people forgot about it. So therefore, that's going to be tamei. That's the halacha. Now, says the Mishnah, Ezahi Kreva, what's considered close to the city that we said regarding it, that even if it's new, since it's close, it's going to be tamei, because we said maybe a woman went and buried her miscarriage over there. It's Chamisha Mama. That's considered close to the city, 50 amas. Bezi Yeshana, what's considered old, which we said regarding old, that even if it's far, it's going to be tamei, because it's old. So even though it's far now, but maybe at one point there was a Levi and they buried someone that we just don't remember. It's Shishim Shana Dibber Meir. That's how Meir qualifies new, meaning that's how it qualifies close and old. Although we're talking about time and space, there's two different halachas that we're mentioning. So he qualifies space close as 50 amas and time in old as 60 years. So if it's already more than 60 years since that mound has been there, then we're going to suspect that's tummy even though it's far. Vidai has a different qualification. He says that Kareva, that what's considered close, is She'en Kareva Hemen. That there's nothing closer than that. But if there's another mound that's closer than that one, even if it's within 50 amas, it's going to be like it's far. And therefore, if it's new, it's going to be tar, like we said regarding far. Because if it was true that the only concern that we have, which is maybe a single woman went to bury her aborted fetus, then she wouldn't have left a closer hill and gone to the further one. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says that close is only if there's no closer hill. Then we have to suspect that maybe that one, the miscarried fetus was buried. And what's Yeshana, what's considered old, that we suspect even when it's far, is She'ein Adam Zeicher. Is if no one remembers, meaning, what does it mean no one remembers? That no one could say, I remember, now the old people are like, this is your line, right? That there was never a mound over here. In my days, this is when this mound happened. Oh, ich gedenk, this is like a classic elder person statement. So if no one could say that I remember that this was never here, then that's considered old already, because no one could remember that there was never a Tom's River. Anyone here is that old to say, I remember that I saw Tom, so that's considered old. So it says the Gemara, just to clarify the Mishnah, my era, my derech. When you told me that regarding these mounds that are close, whether to the city or to the road, you tell me whether it's new or old doesn't make a difference. Since it's close by, we're going to say that's tummy because maybe a woman went and walked by herself. Now, she had a miscarriage and she doesn't want to go ahead and publicize it. People didn't even know that maybe she was pregnant. She goes and buries it over there. So we're going to suspect that's tummy. So what does it mean a city and the road? What does the Gemara mean? Because if you really think to say, it means to say that a mound near a city, and derech means derech mamish, a mound near a path. Out of doubt, do you think we're going to presume that every mound in Eretz Yisrael is going to be coming? But if it's near a city or near a road, but Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg says, they found an excuse to go ahead and presume regarding every mound that we are Taharu Eretz Yisrael, and they actually purified Eretz Yisraal, as the Gemara explains in Mesechta Nazar in the last paragraph. But one thing is that we see, as the Gemara explains over there, that out of doubt we're not going to presume Tum in Eretz Yisrael. So what are you telling me that if it's near a road or near a city that we're going to say, if it's close by, it's going to be telling? Why would we say such a thing? So remember there, he qualifies very importantly. He says, no. Ir, a city means Ir Asmuch Lebeis HaKavaris. We don't just mean any city. We mean a city that's close to a cemetery. And the derech, the road that we're talking about is specifically derech Beis HaKavaris, the road of the cemetery. And that's what we said regarding if it's nearby and if no one remembers. So now the Gemara explains. Bishlam derech Beis HaKavaris, you understand the road of the cemetery. Yeah, the Zimnin and the Misrami ben Hashmashas, at times it could happen that it's a late Levaya on Friday afternoon. There's no time to get to the cemetery. And it could be it's going to happen that they're going to be what are we doing where Adam's running and there's a mound over there. So I say, okay, people don't usually walk on these small hills, so we're going to bury the person over there. So that's why we said they have to be chayshish in a tail of these tululiyos that are krevis lededef, that are close to the road. Which road? Not just any road, the road of the cemetery. That's what we're saying that, okay, whether it's old or new, doesn't make a difference. We're still suspecting maybe someone buried over there. But we're running a city that's close to the cemetery, so that's not like the road where you could be there on Erev Shabbos. It's just a city. So Kuli the basic everyone's going to go to the cemetery. So why should we be concerned that maybe it's someone buried in a little hill near that city? Sarab Chanina says, I'll tell you why. Because women, they're not going to go to the cemetery. Women, they want to do it discreetly, and they're going to bury their fetuses over there. Because they're just going to go close to the city, which is near the cemetery, not just any city, specifically the city near the cemetery. And those who are smitten with boils, that their limbs fall off, or they cut it off because it's just so infected. And the limb from a living person contaminates just like a limb from a dead person, as the Gemara says in Chol Naf base. So this miscarried fetus or these limbs of the Mukashrim are going to be taming. So ad 50 amma, up until 50 amma is azli'i luchada. The woman's going to go by herself, and therefore we're concerned up until 50 amos, which we call Karev, when it's near the city. Since it's near the cemetery, they're going to go and they're going to bury it over there in the mound. But Fei, more than that, Davre Inish Bahadosh, she's going to take someone else with her. She's taking someone else with her, the basic first she's already going to go to the cemetery, because it's a town near the cemetery. That Hilkach Tumah Be'eretz Yisrael Lemechazkin, and therefore we're not going to resume Tumah in Eretz Yisrael, because people don't bury in hills. Here, where it's near the cemetery, these are people that are commonly going to the cemetery. So we're saying up until 50 amos, she might not go to the cemetery because it's something that's more convenient and it could be more discreet. But if it's further than 50 amos, she's not going to go by herself, and therefore we're not suspecting that she's going to do this. She's just going to go to the cemetery already together with another person. So therefore, the only chashash we have to have if it's karma. Now, Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda, this is what relates back to our sugya. Why are we bringing this in? Rav Chizda says, Shemaminam Reb Meir, what we can infer from Reb Meir, meaning for the fact that he qualified what's considered an old pile, an old hill. It's 60 years, that was his opinion. And the reason is because a person doesn't remember from what happened 60 years ago. Oh, so he says, obviously, Hai Sadu, so this testimony, Achit Shnei Mitker. Person only remembers for 60 years. But more than 60 years, he doesn't remember, and therefore a person cannot testify. There's the statute of limitations on a person's testimony. Remember from 60 years ago? You're going to say testimony, what happened 60 years ago? It sounds like you don't, because that's why we're saying the pile. The Gemara says, well, it's not true. Because Hassan over there, by that hill, regarding if we're concerned if someone was buried over there, a person is not paying attention to identify necessarily was there a hill here or not. You can't remember yesterday was there a hill over here. But over here, where they made him a witness for this event, even the Ramadan, since it was imposed upon him and he's paying attention to it, and even more than 60 years, we can rely on his testimony if he testifies, because the person is specifically going ahead and trying to make his memory recall, and therefore we're going to believe him. Now let's start the next Mishnah, which continues the theme of the previous Mishnahs of Kiyum Shtaris, of the authenticating of the documents. So it says the Mishnah, this witness says, oh, this is my handwriting. And he looks at the other signature and says, oh, and that's my friend, that's his handwriting. And the other one does the same thing. He says, Zek Sabyod. He says, oh, this is my signature. And that's the signature of my friend. Says the Mishnah, they're believed. Because Rashi explains, you have two witnesses who are testifying on every single signature. Every signature is being authenticated with two witnesses, the guy himself and the other guy. Each one is having two witnesses verify that. Fine. But now we have a machlekes. Let's say Zemezek Savyadi. Let's say this guy says, this is my signature. The other guy says, and this is my signature. Then Rebbe says, it's not enough. Even though you have two witnesses on the two signatures, but you only have each one on his own signature, each guy needs to have another person together with them to recognize both signatures, because you need two witnesses on every single signature, as the Gemara is going to explain the reasoning. So it's not enough to each one say it's mine. Okay, that's only one witness verifying your signature. You need another person with the two of you. But B'chamim, they disagree. And we'll see in the Gemara, it's a fundamental principle about what they're disagreeing about, what actually they're doing on this document. They say, no, they don't need another person to join with them. A person is believed to say, this is my handwriting, and this is my signature. And if that's the case, now you have this two witnesses that are in the document verified through each one, verifying it's his own signature. Okay, now you have two witnesses on the document. You don't need to have two witnesses on each signature. That's the machlekes in Mishnah, what you need to do. Do you need two? What are the Mekayim essentially doing? Do you need two witnesses on each one? Or no, just you have each one verifying his own signature, and then now you have two witnesses essentially that are in the document that are now saying we are those people, and if that's valid, I don't need two on each signature. Anytime, I was saying.